Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Guys and a Chainsaw. I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
Today we hit another request. This one came through our Facebook page from Addison. Bone Tomahawk from 2015, starring our favorite Kurt Russell. You like Kurt Russell, Craig?
I do like Kurt Russell. I think, what do the kids say today? He's a snack.
You think you could say that in a more sultry voice? I didn't quite. I don't think you made your point clear enough.
No, I do like Kurt Russell. He's a cool guy.
Yeah, me too. I've always loved him. Maybe not as much as you, but I've always loved him. All right, so we were very happy to review Bone Tomahawk. I hadn't actually heard of this one before. It's only been 4 years since it came out. Directed by S. Craig Zahler. Now, S. Craig Zahler is also known for doing Puppet Master, The Littlest Reich. Yeah, he did that one after Bone Tomahawk. Usually those ones come first.
Yeah, usually.
But I think this guy's actually more prolific than his IMDb page would say. He's written like over 40 screenplays. He's several novels that have been published. It just so happens that most of the stuff that he's written has not come to fruition in production. A lot of it's been optioned by A-list actors. He likes to joke that most of the A-list has passed through a lot of his scripts in Hollywood, but for one reason or another, things just fall through. So he wrote this one with the intention of directing it. Put a team together, wrote this, clearly got a lot of A-list actors interested because we have quite a few names in this one.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And I really enjoyed watching this movie. It is 2 hours and 12 minutes, which at first gave me pause.
Me too.
Craig and I don't like to watch long movies, but in this case, I thought it really worked because it was almost like sitting down to watch a John Wayne Western. It's a Western, by the way. Western.
Yeah, it definitely is. I would actually say that it's more of a Western than it is a horror movie. I don't know. I feel a little bamboozled, Addison.
Thanks a lot, Addison.
No, I mean, it certainly has horror elements, but in the first 10 minutes and the last 20 minutes of the movie, beyond that, it's really more of a Western. And it is good. And like you know, I saw 2 hours and 12 minutes or whatever it is, and I was like, oh, it's so long. But it didn't feel really that long. But I did read in the trivia, it said something along the lines of the final film is wholly representative of the first draft of the script. And I thought, yeah, kind of seems like it. Like, I kind of felt like they could have trimmed it by about a half an hour.
Really?
And yeah. I mean,
they could have,
because anything that was going on was, terrible or super boring, but I didn't necessarily need big long conversations about the flea circus. Actually, the flea circus was kind of one of the sweeter moments of the movie, but there were other conversations and stuff that went on that I'm like, this would have been a really good deleted scene.
Something to go back and look at later.
Right. And I'm being harsh. It wasn't bad. Nothing in it. Well, there were a couple of cringy acting moments, I thought. Just a couple. Overall, I thought it was well done. I thought that it could have been cut a little bit for time, but overall, I understand why it was recommended. I don't think it was a bad movie. I think there was a lot of talent that went into this, and so you'll see as we go through it. I'm not going to be super critical because I really did end up enjoying it, and it didn't feel super long, and it didn't feel like a waste of my time, so I'm not going to give it too much crap for being a little bit long.
Well, I'm just going to disagree with you just a little bit. I mean, I understand the points you're making, and I see what you're making, but this would have been a very different different film if it had been cut down and trimmed to the bare minimum.
Yeah.
It would have been very much like many horror films we see. But actually, this was addressed by in something I read. I don't know. I was reading somewhere online about this, and the writer-director S. Craig Zoller said that there were distributors and money people who wanted him to do a 90-minute version of this, and he said, I wasn't interested in doing a 90-minute version filled with heavy metal, even though I'm a heavy metal fan. He wanted a Western. A Western with horror elements, a horror Western. And I felt like watching this, I was getting a little bit of an Eli Roth vibe. I'm thinking of maybe the first Hostel, where quite a bit of story goes by before you get to the horror elements. And then suddenly, bam, at the end, the last 30 minutes is super brutal and super shocking.
That's true.
I felt like that was this movie a little bit, but also I just really enjoy Westerns too. And I felt like this one at its core was so classic Western. In fact, some of the characters in here are really throwbacks to particular characters in the John Wayne Westerns. I'm thinking specifically of Rio Bravo, the character who's the guy? Chicory.
Oh, yeah, he was great. Richard Jenkins played him.
Yeah.
And he's been in a bazillion things, but he played the dad in the American remake, Let Me In. He was also in Cabin in the Woods. He was one of the two scientists. Very recognizable, and I liked him a lot.
He was good and he was sweet, and he did the little flea circus bit that you're talking about.
I've been thinking a lot about that flea circus. Remember the one that come into Bright Hope? Well, I don't know what your opinion is, but my wife said it was all a trick. Even when those brothers give us those magnifying glasses and we saw those fleas pull that little stagecoach right into the depot, or roll those cannons, those tiny little cannons onto the battlefield. She said, those fleas are dead. They're just glued to some mechanical contraption, that moves on its own, like a timepiece or a wind-up. Still, I thought it was real. And I told her, I said, don't talk so loud. The performers will hear you.
He really called back a guy named Walter Brennan, who was almost like a sidekick to John Wayne and probably like about a dozen John Wayne movies, in the same way that he played this sort of...
Yeah.
I want to say sidekick, but, he's the guy that makes Kurt Russell look really good. Yet he's just friendly, and he's there, and he's amiable and affable, and he's there to kind of lighten the mood a little bit, but also to kind of keep everybody else happy and going and kind of push. And very much like Walter Brennan was in those old Western movies, who played more of like a hickish character in those, but it's the same kind of feel, and I thought that buddiness really worked well.
Oh, yeah.
How Kurt Russell, sometimes you even forget he's there, and it's okay, because when he is there, he's a strong, commanding sheriff. It just, again, sort of in the same way that John Wayne was. He didn't have to be out front and boisterous. He just was a presence when he was on screen that always reminded you, oh yeah, this guy's still in charge.
Well, it was cute, like Kurt Russell, like you said, he plays kind of the hard-nosed sheriff, and that's not to say that he's unfeeling or unsympathetic. He's not, he is a sympathetic character, and he does have emotion, but it's almost like Chicory is kind of like the little sympathetic, simple angel on his shoulder.
Oh, there you go. That's a good way of putting it.
It's really cute. Chicory's an older guy. Sheriff Hunt, Kurt Russell, refers to him very affectionately as old man, most of the time. And
he's the backup deputy.
Yeah, he's the backup deputy, but he's so devoted to his duty, and it was really cute. I liked him a lot, and I liked that dynamic between the two of them. In fact, I thought that the dynamic between all of the characters was really endearing. Even some of the characters who weren't on their own particularly endearing. I'm thinking specifically of the character played by Matthew Fox, Brooder. He was kind of a dick, but
yeah, he was.
Within the context of this group of guys, he played a part, like they were a part of a gang, like they needed one kind of jerky kind of guy, but he also served a purpose. He was also really efficient, he was a sharpshooter and he got stuff done, and so he served his purpose. I thought that the chemistry between the characters was really good.
Yeah, the balance is really quite good, especially that posse that eventually goes out, because you have Kurt Russell, who's the law. Mm-hmm. He's the one who's going to lead the group, but also with a certain sense of right and wrong. Chicory, like you said, is like the angel on his shoulder, and he's more the moral center of the group, and he's the one constantly sort of reminding people what's right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because you really, you wonder early on, like, why is this guy here? Like, he's going to be the first to go.
Oh, right.
Because he's got a limp, he's older and all that, but he has a role to play, and it's not physical. It's to be that guy. And then, like you said...
But hold up, he's not worthless either.
No.
He can pull his own when the stuff starts to go down.
He does, but that's not immediately obvious, when they start out, right?
Right.
And then, like you said, you've got Bruder, who is the kind of cold-blooded, chip on his shoulder guy, and he's more of the amoral type, and that's sort of an acknowledgement of the whole man from nowhere trope that you find. This isn't a man from nowhere movie, but, in Westerns, you have this sense that in order to get justice in the West, you have to do things that are offensive to the sensibilities of the populace, Yeah. You have to cross the line because the bad guys are willing to cross the line.
Right.
So you got to have somebody who's willing to cross the line, but at the end, like, the movie ends up holding them accountable for it,
Yeah.
In the man from nowhere trope, the guy has to ride off into the sunset. He can't linger in the town. He can't be one of them. He ends up dying in the movie. He's not the only one, but he's one of the first ultimately to go, I think. So, yeah, it's really interesting. And then you have that dynamic of the guy who shouldn't be with the group, but he's obligated to be there, right? And he's going to slow them down, and he's going to actually be kind of a problem to at least to their end and their goal. But nobody is going to tell him not to be there, and that is the whole reason for their going off. Is the husband of a woman named Samantha, Arthur. And so we've got Arthur, we have the sheriff, we have Bruder, and we have Chicory, who go off on this adventure. But, of course, a good deal of the movie has to lead up to that.
Right. Honestly, this is one of the longer movies that we have reviewed in a while, and I took significantly fewer notes than I usually take because... really, not all that much happens. You could summarize the plot of this movie in 60 seconds.
Like most Westerns, by the way.
Well, and that may be, I've seen some modern Westerns. I grew up in a rural area. My family were country folk, and they were big into Westerns. I never really got into it, so I haven't seen a lot of them. I've seen some more of the modern ones, and you and I watched Ravenous and reviewed it, and I really enjoyed that. But I don't maybe know as many of the tropes as you do when it comes to Westerns. But the way that the movie starts out is you've got these two guys, and they're bandits. You've got Purvis, who's played by David Arquette, who is also in Ravenous, by the way, and Buddy, who's played by Sid Haig, who keeps popping up in all these movies that we review.
Just last week.
Yeah. I guess their deal is that they are robbers and with no moral compass. Like, they will just kill people in their sleep and then rob them of whatever they have on them. And that's where it opens. They have killed these guys, these sleeping men. And
this is a good way to open this movie with these two guys, because of course these guys are going to stumble upon the main bad thing, but these guys really lay out for us the danger, right?
Yeah.
That these other characters are going to face throughout the whole movie. And that is, while you're on this trek across the Old West, you fall asleep or you go on this trail, it's a scary place out there, and there are people just like this who will come up to you in your sleep and just kill you and take your stuff.
Right.
And so I thought it was really actually pretty clever to start out this movie with two of these characters, getting us on their side and their point of view, and even humanizing them in a way. I mean, they're affable with each other. They're very nonchalant about what they're doing.
Right.
I think it's important because Westerns are a little tricky territory to delve into nowadays, because a lot of our Westerns in the past were about the Indians. It's the white man against the Indians, and the Indians are the bad guy, and they're savage, and they're going to come and they're going to steal your women, and they're going to kill people. And so when they're going out across the West, that's the danger, right? These other people, and they've been so demonized in film that it's very clear that the director here has taken great lengths to not be that kind of movie. And so by having these two white guys be the brigands that are out there and very nonchalantly, just like the guy next door, having these conversations with each other, doing their thing, except their thing is coming up to people in the middle of their sleep, cutting their throats, shooting them in the head and taking all their stuff and then wandering off to the next thing. I thought it was really smart, to do this.
Yeah, and both of these guys, David Arquette and Sid Haig are both... I just like them both so much. They're just they're both really charismatic, and they play Old West vagabonds really well. They make slitting throats and shooting people in the head amusing.
There are 16 major veins in the neck, and you have to cut through them all.
I ain't 16.
My uncle had an acquaintance with a man who used to be a doctor, and that's what he said.
And so I was thinking that they were going to be around.
Do you hear that?
That was a gust.
That's a real musical gust.
And?
It's ominous.
This is not the time for womanly imaginings. Go.
And they come across... it's all desert and mountainous, and they come across this area where they start seeing, at first, animal skulls, mounted in rocks, and then eventually human skulls, and then what appears to be what looks like an Indian burial ground, like a smaller version of what you see in Pet Sematary, mounded rocks and those types of things. They're hearing these weird howls and things, and eventually Buddy Sid Haig is like, well, if you're out there, come and get us, and then he just immediately gets shot right in the throat with an arrow, and he's dead. And Purvis, David Arquette, takes off, and then it cuts to 11 days later, and we are in the lovely small western town of Bright Hope. It looks very clean and new. And this is where, in the next 10 minutes, we are introduced to all of our characters. And the first one we're introduced to is somebody you've already mentioned, Arthur, who is played by Patrick Wilson, who's been in a bazillion things. Look him up if you don't know. He's been in a million things. What we learn about him is that he's this young, up-and-coming guy. He tells the sad story about how he was working his way up in this... I don't know what it was. Was it mining? Was it farming?
I'm not sure either.
I don't know. I'm not sure what it was, but he was, he was a low guy on the totem pole, but he had just worked his way up to the point where he was going to be like supervisor or something. But then he broke his leg.
Yeah.
Now, the group that he was working with has moved on and has taken with them most of the men of the town. So the town is very sleepy right now. It's mostly wives and families of this crew or whatever it is that has moved on to do other work, but he's very disappointed because he's lost his opportunity or whatever. But luckily, to ease his disappointment, he has a smoking hot wife named Samantha, played by Lily Simmons, and she takes care of him in more ways than one. But she's also I don't know, she's
the town doctor, or at least the doctor that's available right now.
Or a nurse or an aide or something. She's got medical expertise. And then we go to the town pub where we meet Brooder, whose name is very fitting because he's kind of this broody guy played by Matthew Fox from Lost and lots of other things. And there are just so many pop-up people in this. There's a piano player in the bar played by James Tolkien, who was the principal in the Back to the Future movies. I recognized him immediately. And then Chicory, who is, we've already talked about, and Sheriff Hunt, the Kurt Russell, and You know, as much as this is a Western and a horror movie eventually, in these first 20 minutes I was thinking, is this a comedy? There is quite a bit of humor, and Chicory, Richard Jenkins, is really funny, but in hindsight, it just seems very natural. It doesn't seem like, oh, hardy har slapstick comedy. It just seems like this is the kind of guy he is.
Yeah.
Chicory is just kind of like the down home folksy kind of guy.
Yep.
Like, he seems simple, and it almost seems like the sheriff is kind of humoring him by allowing him to be the backup deputy. But in the end, he's not.
He's pretty deep.
Yeah, I mean, he's a good guy, and he's been through a lot, and he's actually very capable. You know, like, as it turns out, he has medical experience from the military. He has military experience. You know, it's just these very subtle things, but that they make a point of showing that, you know, he visits his wife's grave every day, and he brings her flowers, and he talks to her. And while it may seem a little bit simple, it's also just very sweet and very endearing. To me, he was the most endearing character in the whole movie.
For sure.
I mean, you're just kind of in love with him by the end. Like, he's like your grandpa, who you would never expect to be so wise and so experienced and so capable. And Richard Jenkins did a really great job with that.
I agree.
And that's pretty much it. You know, so we meet all these people, and then Purvis shows up in town, which kind of sets up the events that lead to, you know, the journey of the movie.
Yeah, he basically is seen by Chicory, I think. No.
Yeah,
Yeah, by Chicory.
That's right.
Outside the town burying his bags. And then he comes in and has a drink at the bar, and Chicory comes back and says, you know, Sheriff, there's a mysterious stranger coming to town. And Kurt Russell's like, all right, well, I guess we better go check it out. And so they go to the bar, and Kurt Russell's pretty no-nonsense. I mean, you know, I think that this really sets him up as a strong, clever guy, his first confrontation with this man, because, you know, on the face of it, it's just a guy who wandered in wanting a drink. But you know, Chicory has seen the suspicious thing, so he's going to push him a little bit, and pretty soon he ends up shooting him in the leg and dragging him off to the locker because he suspects something's weird about him. So he's taken to the jail, and they call in Arthur's wife, Samantha, to help with his leg.
They call for the doctor first, but the doctor's drunk.
Oh, right.
So then they have to get Samantha, who has just had a very steamy sex scene with her husband, but apparently she's ready to go now.
Well, and her husband's pretty laid up. He has, well, in more ways than one. Huh?
Yeah, right.
But he got injured. His leg broken, maybe his shin broken or something during his previous thing. And so he's clearly, and they make very great pains to show the pain that he's in with his leg. So she's tended to his leg, and she's going to go and remove the bullet from this other leg. And they call in the regular deputy, who's a young guy who it doesn't end up being on the screen for too long.
Nick, yeah.
They ask Nick to watch her and their prisoner, who is out from tincture of opium. She's given him a little spoonful of this stuff in order to calm him down for their surgery. So he's more or less out. And so they decide that they can walk out. There's a stable hand who goes out to see some horses and gets immediately slaughtered. And the horses are missing, and so the guy who owns the horses comes in to the sheriff and tells the sheriff, hey, these horses are missing. It's almost morning time by now, I think.
Yeah.
And they investigate the horses, and they do see that the horses are missing. They do see that this guy's been killed. They're not sure if it's by an animal or what. And then somebody comes and runs down and says that the whole sheriff's office is empty. And they go there and they find that the girl is missing and the prisoner is missing. And and then there's a arrow stuck in the wall. Kind of a strange arrow. The Kurt Russell picks up the arrow and looks at it and says, I'm not really sure what Indians these might be. So we're going to get our town expert on that, who is a Native American. And so again, like this was a really cool part of the movie, and like I said, it was almost a little too obvious how the great pains they were taking to make sure this movie's not too racist.
Yeah.
What they're really trying to do is set up from the beginning that the bad guys here are not Indians. And so they all meet up in the bar. It's just everybody we've seen so far pretty much gathers together, and they call in this guy, and he looks at it, and he knows exactly what this is.
There's only one group that hunts with these.
Who?
They don't have a name.
What kind of tribe doesn't have a name?
One that doesn't have a language. Cave dwellers.
You know where they are?
I have a general idea.
You'll take us to them?
I won't.
Because you're an Indian?
Because I don't want to get killed.
You're afraid of your own kind?
They're not my kind. They're a spoiled bloodline of inbred animals who rape and eat their own mothers.
Well, what are they?
Troglodytes.
What do they look like?
A man like you would not distinguish them from Indians, even though they're something else entirely.
Bruder, at some point here, when they decide they're all going to ride out and find these guys and rescue Samantha, Bruder says he wants to join the party too because he feels responsible. He's the one who came to get Samantha. Plus, I've killed more Indians than probably anybody else in this room. And the Native American guy turns to him and says, well, that's a
strange brag or something like that. Yeah.
There's a little bit of that back and forth just to let us know, by the way, the bad guys in this are not Native Americans. In fact, that's all we really see of Native Americans for the rest of this film.
I mean, they are, but they're also other. You know, yes, they are Native Americans, but they're not your typical. You know, they're bad. You know, like
they're true savages.
Just as in, you know, the guys from The Hills Have Eyes are white guys, but you know, like they're not just representative of Caucasian people. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, of course.
That's what I felt like. I mean, that's basically what it is. I mean, they are kind of The Hills Have Eyes, kind of Native Americans. They're cave dwellers and cannibals,
but almost from like another time.
Yeah,
like they've had very little contact with civilization. They've got their entirely own thing going.
Yeah, they're nonverbal. Yeah, right. Exactly. I wanted to mention we're also introduced to the sheriff's wife, Lorna, who's played by Catherine Morris, who was the lead on the network television show Cold Case forever. And you hardly see her at all, but I like her, so I wanted to give her a shout out.
They have a nice little scene and a couple scenes between him and her. And it's really nice that this movie takes great pains to show that relationship because it raises the stakes a little bit about them leaving. And that was another thing that I was really struck with by this movie. I think more so than your stereotypical Westerns tend to do. The women are not like shoved to the side or they're just prostitutes or they're just kind of receding in the background in this hyper masculine story. The women are actually very much a part of this story. And not just because it's a rescue the princess kind of way, but you're going to see all of the women who care about these men. The fact that they're leaving is a big deal to them, and they're going to be back there worrying.
Well, and the men who are genuinely driven by their feelings for their wives.
And talk about it a lot.
Yeah.
While they're out on the trail, this is the subject of half of their conversation. Even Chicory, who, like you said earlier, is grieving his dead wife. And it shows a scene of him taking the flowers to the grave. He talks about her out on the road, and that's just not something you typically see in these Westerns, really.
Right.
The women are more or less kind of forgotten, you know?
Yes.
So I thought that was a really nice touch here as well, and it really made this a little more relatable and just rounded out these characters so well and made you care more. And, you know, I thought that was a good reason why the first part of the movie could take so long for me. I was interested in these people. I was interested in their plight. I really got to know them. I really started to care about them. And through means that I thought were quite interesting. I liked hearing these little stories and these little asides in the same way that kind of watching a Quentin Tarantino movie.
Right.
You know, sometimes the dialogue is part of the enjoyment, even though it doesn't necessarily advance the plot any. It's still kind of real, what they're doing, and it's clever, and it's cute, and it's fun, and gets you to know these people a little more and care about them a little more.
Yeah, I agree. And so everybody meets up in the bar. They talk about, you know, what they're going to do and ultimately what's decided. The sheriff says, I'm going to go and Arthur is going to go because we have to. We have no other choice. Arthur because it's his wife, and the sheriff because he's the sheriff. He's the law. He has to go. But Chicory says, no, I want to go too. And he says, no, old man, you stay here. It's almost kind of like a father-son kind of deal. You feel the connection between these two men. Chicory obviously respects the sheriff because of his authority, but it goes beyond that. You see that there is genuine affection between these guys. And Chicory insists, and he is an older guy, but he insists, Nick, the deputy, is gone. This is what a backup deputy is for. Eventually, the sheriff concedes. And then Bruder says, I'm going to. I've killed more Indians than any of you combined, and it was me who took the wife there or whatever, and so he's gonna go too. So they're the ones that are gonna go. There was this tiny moment that's totally insignificant, totally could have been cut, but I'm glad it wasn't, where the mayor and his wife barge in.
Another great example of the woman, the woman's place in this. It's hilarious.
And the mayor's wife obviously just speaks for him. I don't think that the mayor had a single line. I don't think he spoke a single word.
Just at the very end when he asked how to spell troglodytes for the telegraph.
Right. But they burst in, and the mayor's wife was played by Sean Young, who, God bless her, is just a washed up actress and will just
take anything,
do anything that's given to her. And her performance is just almost laughable. Like, it's so silly. My favorite story about Sean Young, it has nothing to do with this movie, and anybody who's into movie trivia will probably already know this, but Sean Young was supposed to be in the first Michael Keaton Batman. So Sean Young was cast in that role, but there was a horse riding sequence, and when they were filming that, she fell off the horse and she broke her leg or something, and they replaced her with Kim Basinger. When Tim Burton said that he was going to do a new Batman movie, Sean Young wanted to play Catwoman, and she dressed herself up in complete full Catwoman garb and went to the studio offices where Tim Burton was working to try to lobby for this role. And Tim Burton literally hid under his desk until they were able to get her out of the building.
How embarrassing.
Yeah, and that's my favorite Sean Young story. But anyway, she's funny, and her husband, who only has that one line, is Jameson Newlander, who was Alan Frog from The Lost Boys. He was the Frog brother who wasn't Corey Feldman.
I did not know that. Oh my gosh.
Totally unimportant, but there you go. There's your trivia for the day.
Let's be kind to Sean Young. She was Rachel in Blade Runner, and she was quite a powerhouse in that movie. So.
Oh, she was. Yeah,
it was years ago.
Early 80s. Her star was rising, and then it just fell, and she didn't take it very well. But anyway, all right. So they're all going to go out now. Okay, two things. One, I think that it's totally stupid that they took this maimed guy along with them. I understand why he would want to go.
Arthur?
Yeah, I understand why he would want to go because it was his wife. But I don't understand why anybody with any sense of logic would allow him to come on this treacherous journey. They barely know where they're going, and they know the sheriff says that normally this would be a 5-day horse ride, but we're going to try to do it in 3 days. And he even makes a big deal of we got to be really careful because we could kill these horses if we're not careful. It's going to be this treacherous journey. So why would they take him? I don't know that I necessarily believe that. Ultimately it's important to the plot, whatever.
Well, they could have had a scene where they're like, "No, you can't go," and he'd be like, "It's my wife, damn it!" And then it's like, "Okay, well, just don't slow us down." Or they could have just acknowledged it from the beginning, like they did. I feel like he was gonna go no matter what.
I know, I get it. I mean, I understand for the purposes of the movie why he went. I just am saying logistically, it doesn't make any sense.
Logistically, it's a bad idea.
Yeah. Secondly, as I was watching the next at least hour of this movie, I kept thinking of that scene from Stand By Me where they're sitting around the campfire and they're talking about TV shows. And Will Wheaton says, "You know that show Wagon Train? I mean, it's a really good show, but they never get anywhere. They just keep on wagon training." Like, and that, like, seriously, like, at least an hour of this movie is just them journeying.
Sure.
And that's not to say that it's entirely boring. It's not, but like, it's just a long trek through the desert.
But it's not like stuff doesn't happen on this trek.
Fair. All right. Well, fine.
I was
Tell 'em
actually
what happened.
Thank you, Craig. I was actually flashing back to what is not a Western, but could very well be considered a Western because it had a Western style plot, which was our the Seven Golden Vampires. And that's almost the opposite of this movie. In that movie, they trek out, and the trek is made fairly meaningless, right? It's like you don't really see much of their treacherous journey. They have the vampires jump out at them once, and then boom, they're there at the town. Whereas with this movie, it felt more like a real Western. This is about how hard it is to trek against the West, how lonely it can be. The journey is half of the problem, right? And especially because you got this guy with his leg. And as had been set up in the very beginning of the movie, it's not just these troglodytes at the end of the road that they have to worry about.
Right.
It's camping up at night. They're going to be sought by brigands. And sure enough, they do. And there's one really interesting, I thought it was a great scene as well. And this is where it feels very Tarantino-esque, because Tarantino does a really good job of putting characters in situations that really show you who they are.
Well, and morally ambiguous.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. And in this one scene, they are waken up by these two Mexican guys who approach the camp. And they didn't announce themselves, which you learn pretty early on is part of the necessity when you're out there.
Right.
But they start talking and saying, "Oh, it's all right," and they throw their gun away. And while Kurt Russell is going through this very typical sort of police procedure of getting them disarmed and having them slowly approach, suddenly, bang, 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 Bruder shoots them both dead.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, "What are you doing? Why did you do that?" And he said, "They are not going to be good news for us in any way, shape, or form." You know, they're scouts from a party that wants to ambush us.
Yep.
And Kurt Russell's sort of like, "Yeah, well, I mean, maybe I kind of know that, but it's okay." He's more like, "I could have dealt with it. And furthermore, I would like to have talked to them."
Right.
And he's like, "No."
And it really, really bothers Chicory.
Oh, yeah.
Like they move, they move to a different camp and don't light a fire so that they're less conspicuous or whatever. And while they're laying there, Chicory is just clearly really upset about it, and he just keeps saying, "You shouldn't have done that. That was wrong." Plus, Chicory saw that one of them was wearing a crucifix, so he assumes that it was a preacher or a priest or something. And these are all religious men.
Mm-hmm.
He's just really, really upset about it. But then they are ambushed.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, and I feel like the movie doesn't tell you, but the implication that I got was that maybe and probably Bruder wasn't wrong.
No, well, Bruder's the one who
right?
gets... Yeah, and Bruder's the one who gets attacked. Who is it who has to shoot the guy off of Bruder or whatever?
I don't remember which one
of them wakes up and Bruder's being stabbed in the shoulder by this guy who's standing over him, right? It very reminiscent, actually, the very first scene of the movie where a guy's being held down by another guy and stabbed. So so it turns out to be a very viable, very real threat. And you're right. No, I that's the conclusion I drew as well. But the problem with this is now all their horses are gone. Right. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, then it's just, they said it's a 2-day walk from there. And by this time, Arthur, who throughout the whole movie is kind of annoyingly holding them back, they are basically have a deal with him that, okay, we're going to keep walking and you can, he says, don't worry. He says, I'll walk while you sleep. They decide they're going to sleep during the day instead of the night.
Mr. O'Dwyer, that valley is at least a 2-day walk.
I'll try to match your pace. If I fall behind, I'll catch up when you sleep.
You watch the train now. There's one bad fall, you lose that leg.
Okay, no skin off our backs. We're going to lay out, a path of 4 stones every now and then while we go. And, I don't know, man, like this whole Western thing is always pretty fascinating to me. Here you've got this land that stretches out to infinity. One guy, I think, is it Chicory, who says as they're riding early on, he says something like, well, I know the world's supposed to be round, but this part sure don't look it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then they show the horizon, and it's just flat.
I'm sure they have a compass with them, so they know what the general direction they're going. But I just don't know how these guys navigate on foot, let alone
I know.
Somebody can follow a trail after them. It's just
I know. I can't imagine. I have
remarkable.
no idea. I thought the same thing.
He's still kind of catching up with them every now and then as they go, but his leg is getting worse. And at one point, they look at it and they say, this leg is bad. Like, we're going to have to amputate. Chicory, like you said, who had experience doing this during the war, says he can do it. But Arthur says, no, I don't want you to amputate my leg. And they're like, okay, well, I guess that's your choice then. He says, just set it and we'll keep going. So
they give him some opium and they set the leg and they take the rest and he passes out and Chicory tells him, you're probably going to sleep for a long time. And all the while, Chicory and the sheriff are, having these asides, like, is he going to make it? And Chicory's always just very optimistic. Well, he's got a shot. Probably not, but we'll see.
Yeah.
And they go off without him. Eventually they get there. Again, like you said, I can't imagine. These people had to adapt to their circumstances, so I'm sure they were just better at this than you or I would be. They didn't have GPS. They, I don't know, navigated by the sun or the stars, or I don't know, but they get there. And they find this valley that they were looking for. And when they get there, they start hearing those creepy howls again. And eventually they get to the cave. And this is where it finally, to me, started to feel a little bit like a horror movie. I mean, it still felt very much like a Western, but there were definite horror elements going in here. These people, whoever they are, they communicate non-verbally, and they communicate with these inhuman shrieks. Yeah. Like, they're so loud that it seems impossible that a human being could make this noise. And the men figure out immediately when they start hearing it, oh, these are, they've spotted us. These are warnings. They're communicating that we're here. And so they know that they're there. They get to the spot where there's all the skulls and the rocks and stuff, just like we saw in the beginning. And Brooder goes in first. They get to where they can spot the cave. And just like they're talking about what they're going to do. And then just out of nowhere, they're ambushed.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the sheriff gets an arrow in the shoulder.
Yeah.
I don't remember if Chicory got anything at the. Oh yeah, an arrow shoots his hat off and takes off just a tiny little part of his scalp. Like it just missed him. Brooder doesn't get shot, but when he goes to reach for his weapon, his arm gets chopped with a bone tomahawk. There you go.
Nope.
Because they have these bone tomahawks, which are very effective.
Yeah.
And his arm gets about chopped off, and they kill a few of them. Brooder is, significantly wounded, and he says,
"Supply me with dynamite, and don't return until I've used it. I'm far too vain to ever live as a cripple."
He ends up taking another one out. And there are a couple of moments throughout the movie. Like there's one moment after they get ambushed when Brooder's horse doesn't get stolen because he says it's too smart to get stolen by a filthy Mexican. But because the Mexicans couldn't steal it, they maim it, and then Brooder has to shoot his horse. And in that moment, and in this moment when he realizes he's going to die, he cries.
Yep.
There's also a moment when Patrick Wilson earlier in the movie is saying grace, and he weeps, thinking about his wife. Again, I'm not as familiar with the Western genre as you are, but I can only imagine that that's atypical.
Yeah, it pretty much is.
To show these men showing that kind of emotion, and I appreciated it. I actually thought that Patrick Wilson's crying scene was a little bit overwrought, but in this moment when Bruder knew that he was going to die, I believed it.
Yeah.
He was crying, and I believed it. And he does. He takes out, the natives come and throw a bone tomahawk at him, and it goes right into his head. But in the meantime, he's able to take one of them out too. But ultimately, they end up getting captured, and very quickly.
Yeah.
I expected this to be more of a, kind of back and forth kind of thing, but no, like they are just captured very quickly, and they're taken and they're put in cages. Samantha is still there. In a cage, and Nick is still there in a cage. Samantha tells them that the drifter has already been eaten, and then we get what is surely the most gruesome moment of the whole movie. Right? I mean, I was a little bit shocked.
I was really shocked that this movie was going to go there, And again, that's where I felt again like a kind of a Eli Roth vibe to it.
Yeah.
It's really disgusting. They pull out the deputy, the young deputy, Nick, and he's crying and he's screaming, and they strip him down right there in front of the rest of them in the cage. They're in these cages in the cave, and they cut him up, flip him over.
Cut him up.
Well, I
was gonna say, come on, you got to be more descriptive than
all
that.
right,
I mean,
so it's like
brutal.
It's like a Mortal Kombat fatality. Basically, they flip him over. One person's got each of his legs, and they're holding him up upside down by the legs.
Yeah.
And the guy with the tomahawk comes down the middle and starts hacking between his legs until they can pull him apart lengthwise. So yeah, it's pretty gross and really brutal. And this happens in front of all of them.
Yeah. And then they're just like snacking on his legs like it's a chicken leg or something, in front of them. Meanwhile, Arthur has woken up and is making his way there. So we kind of see that. But there are moments between the prisoners now where they talk, and the sheriff and Chicory still have, they took some of the opium with them in a flask. And they think that they can poison some of the natives. Well, first of all, they ask her, Samantha, how many there are, and she estimates about 12 men. And she says there are also 2 women, but they're blind cripples. And we see them later, and it's so gross and disgusting. Like they are obviously just incubators. Like it's just
their eyes have been put out. They have a stake in each eye, and then their limbs have been cut off.
Yeah, it's disgusting.
It's really gross.
So they do. I mean, they play a little trick, like they pretend they're fighting over the whiskey or whatever, and the cannibals take it, and a couple of them drink it, and she says one of them will die, one of them will be out for several days, one of them won't be affected at all. And she says, so there's about 7 left or 5 left. I don't know.
Yeah.
Then we get another scene with Arthur, who is like totally debilitated, but manages to take out like 5 guys.
He turns out to be the most capable after all, and really the key to their success here at the end. So it's pretty good thing that they brought him along.
Most capable is not even fair. Like these guys, like
Most
he's just
lucky?
laying on the ground, and these guys just keep running up to him, and he keeps shooting them.
Well, he's smart enough to have himself backed up against like a rock wall or something like that. So at least they can only approach from one spot. Plus, you're right. These guys, they don't seem that concerned with getting to him because they're like, oh, he's shooting at me. Well, I'll break out my bow and arrow. Oh, he shot my arrow apart. I guess I better walk towards him. And then as he comes towards him, he's able to reload his gun in the meantime and shoot him. So yeah, they don't seem quite as brutal and as quick when they're with him as they did with the others.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But the key is that he sees that there's something in their throat, and I thought this was an interesting touch because there is that question, like, how are they making that ungodly noise?
Right.
And he sees that what they've done is they've taken like a piece of bone, almost like a vertebrae or something, and fashioned it into a kind of whistle.
Yeah, it's like the thing that the velociraptors have in Jurassic Park. Yeah.
And put it in their necks. So he cuts this out of one of their necks, and then he uses it to trick them. So he blows through it and makes that sound, and they jump out of the bushes or start running down the way. But he's ready to shoot them as they come. So there's a little bit. He has a little bit more of an advantage than the other guys did have in this spot.
True.
But how he manages to crawl his way all the way up to the cave, which is in the side of a cliff. I'm still kind of wondering how all that went down.
Yeah,
The movie doesn't show us that part.
No, it's unexplained. One of the most heart-wrenching moments for me is the cannibals figure out that they have been tricked with this poison. When they had been done with it, they had taken the flask and they had thrown it in the ashes of the fire, the embers. It was still burning. And they pull the sheriff out and they knock him out,
sort of,
and then they slice open his abdomen and they shove that burning hot flask inside him, and they do other things too. And the reason that it was so heart-wrenching to me is because when Nick was getting killed, the sheriff had said to him, "Nick, the cavalry's coming, they'll be here soon, we're gonna get out of here." And Chicory had said later, "Is that true?" And he said, "No, I just made it up." And why would you make that up? And he said, "Because if that were happening to me, that's what I would want to hear." And when the cannibals start mutilating and, apparently killing him, Chicory does the same thing. He's like, "I'll avenge your death. I'll avenge." I mean, it probably sounds stupid to those of you out there listening, but you just get the sense that there was really an affection between these men.
Yeah.
And for him to try to comfort him in this most brutal and horrible of moments, it touched me a little bit.
You were just sad to see Kurt Russell get hacked up.
Oh no! He died a hero, and like you don't even see him die because, as you said, Arthur somehow gets himself up this cliff wall that the rest of them had to be pulled up on ropes by, but he somehow gets up there and he takes out, a couple of them, and then Kurt Russell takes out the big scary one with tusks. So, all the survivors are there. They know that there are still a couple of the cannibals left, and Arthur says to the sheriff, "Sheriff, are you going to make it?" And he says, "No."
Yeah.
No.
It's very clear on that.
Are you sure? Yes. Backup deputy, I'm giving you this duty. I want you to escort them back home. And I'm going to stay here and I'm going to do my best to take out the remaining ones because they know where our town is. I'm going to try to take them out. And so they leave him. And it's obvious that Chicory doesn't want to leave him, but the sheriff insists.
And Chicory kind of lingers, and the sheriff says a great line. He says, "Say goodbye to my wife, and I'll say hello to yours." Yeah, right?
I almost cried.
No,
I didn't, but I almost did. That was a great
Another
laugh.
really good case of showing without telling. As they're walking away off into the sunset, basically, Chicory picks up a rock to hold
through that graveyard again.
Mm-hmm. So because clearly in case they encounter somebody, he's got something, and then he hears 3 or 4 gunshots, and he kind of looks back, and he tosses the rock away and goes on, which is, a nice little moment to leave us with. I think it zooms in on the rock, and that's the last shot of the movie.
Yeah, it's the end of the movie. Like they're confident that the sheriff did what he wanted to do. He took out those, because you hear 4 shots, so you assume that he probably got them, and so he did what he set out to do, and they're going to be okay. And yeah, I mean, overall, I liked the movie. I still don't know that I would qualify it as a horror movie. Definitely horror elements, gruesome, brutal scenes, but it just didn't feel like that. It felt more like a Western and more like a drama, and that's okay. Like I do like other kinds of movies too, and I did enjoy this movie, and I thought there was a lot of really good stuff going on here. I thought there was a lot of talent that went into it, talented actors, beautiful scenery, good cinematography. I think that in the end, my favorite part of it was Chicory and his relationship with the sheriff. And I feel like, well, Chicory and the sheriff, I guess, combined kind of ended up being the heroes of the movie for me. And I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the fact that Arthur's wife, Samantha, was a tough woman. She wasn't a damsel in distress. She happened to get captured, but that didn't change the fact that she was a tough broad.
Yeah.
And I liked that. There was a lot going on that I really, really liked. It was a little long, but overall, I thought it was a quality movie.
Well, it was a great ride, and I at least got to watch this movie when I wasn't super tired. Like sometimes I end up watching these late at night and I'm kind of fading away. I'm really glad that I watched this movie in the middle of the afternoon. It was the perfect middle of the afternoon movie when you've got time and you want to sit down and have an experience. Because like you said, the characterizations are just great. The story is great. It does take its time with it, but it's very Western, in that way. It has those horror elements at the end. And I also loved it. I thought it was great. I'll be recommending this movie to other people. To sum up my thoughts on it, I'm going back to Addison's message to us, and she actually said, it may not be a traditional horror movie, but it's certainly horrifying and a breath of fresh air for both the horror and Western genres.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And I can't think of a better review. Well, thank you, Addison, for your recommendation. We love the movie. If you have a request, you can find us online, either on Facebook. Just search for Two Guys and a Chainsaw, and you'll get our page. You can send us a private message, or you can post there, and that's where we usually get most of our requests from. You can also go to our website, twoguys.red40net.com, where you can find all of our episodes, our past episodes, available for streaming and download. You can also leave a comment there as well. Also, by the way, we don't ask for this usually ever, but if you enjoyed this podcast, not only could you share it with a friend, but you could go out and review it. If you don't like the podcast, please don't. But go to iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you're getting your podcast from, and let everybody else know what you think of us, because I think that probably helps us get out to a wider audience. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't, but that's just my suspicion. Until next time, I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
With Two Guys and a Chainsaw.